How can this hottie be with that old man? The line knifed through the layered noise of Murphy's Tavern. A Friday night blend of laughter, glassware, a pinball machine dinging, a baseball game murmuring from a corner TV, and the jukebox's steady thump. It wasn't the first time some kid said something dumb within earshot of a beer tap, and it won't be the last. But there's dumb, and then there's the kind of stupid that begs the universe for a lesson. My name is Ray. Most folks call me Ree, and I'm 54 years old. I spent 20 years in the Marines learning how to see a room the way a chess player sees a board. Positions, angles, intentions, exits. Trouble usually announces itself before it arrives, if you're trained to notice. Those three college boys had been announcing themselves for an hour. They were wedged into the corner booth, the one under the neon cougar that flickers between Coors and CURS. Every time my wife, Alice, stood to adjust her purse or leaned to hear me over the jukebox, their conversation stopped. The blonde one craned his neck like a prairie dog, then laughed into his sleeve. The stocky one in the Letterman jacket tapped his phone, showed the others something on the screen, and pantomimed biceps. The tall, skinny one with the oily hair kept glancing at the door like he wanted to block it with his opinion when the time came. Alice squeezed my hand under the table. Just a small press. She knows the switch that lives inside me. She's 49 now, but strangers peg her a decade younger when the light hits her auburn hair. Tonight, that blue dress, the one I bought her the year we finally paid off the Tahoe, made her eyes a brighter kind of green. 26 years of marriage, and she still airs out my lungs when she smiles. We were at Murphy's to celebrate her promotion to department head over at Presbyterian Hospital's trauma unit. Same place we had our first date. Same corner booth. Same bartender, Pete, with shoulders like a refrigerator and a memory that keeps stories on file. Ready to go, honey? I asked, because celebration or not, the air had changed and the night was ending on its own terms. She nodded, and we slid out of the booth. The blonde kid popped up from his corner as though on hinge, chest out, cap backward, UNC sweatshirt crisp like a Christmas gift. His buddies rose with him a beat late. He looked at me first, then at Alice like she was a storefront display. Seriously, though, he said, turning the volume up 2 notches so Murphy's could share his confidence. What's a woman like that doing with a guy like you? The second boy, Letterman jacket, forearms like a former fullback who still introduces himself that way, rolled his wrist and smirked. She probably changes his diapers, he said. Come on, beautiful. We'll show you what young guys can do. The tall one, greasy bangs, slid half a step in front of the door with an exaggerated casualness, eyes shining with the sort of courage that fizzles when the wind changes. Yeah, Grandpa probably can't even get it up anymore. Half the bar shifted its attention without moving. Eyebrows up, heads angled, the collective lean of an audience picking seats. Pete paused mid-wipe on a highball glass and just looked at me. The look said, "You want me to toss them, or do you want the lesson to take?" "Yeah," I said softly, nodding as if the three of them had offered a weather report. "Sure, kiddo." Alice felt the tone and pressed my arm harder. The last time she heard that exact pitch, a man in a parking garage found out how momentum works. "What's that supposed to mean, old-timer?" the blonde said. He bounced on his toes, trying to look taller. "It means," I said, keeping my voice conversational, "we're leaving." We stepped toward the door. The skinny one shifted an inch to test my patience and found out it didn't live where he thought it did. I let the door swing open under my palm, and we walked into the October air. Charlotte does fall like it means it. Oak leaves scuttle in the crosswind, and the sky sits low as if it wants to hear you better. Tavern lots are always lit like the memory of daylight, sodium lamps buzzing, shadows pooled between cars, the hum of refrigeration units from the back of the building. We were halfway to my truck when the blonde's voice followed us out. "Hey, where you going?" We weren't done talking. Alice's hand found mine again, automatic as breathing. 26 years together, and she's watched me fight exactly 3 times. Each ended before blood had time to understand it was invited. She was there for all 3. She doesn't like violence, but she respects physics, and she trusts me with both. "Ray," she said softly, "let's just go." I turned. They stood under the lamp like a young pack. The blonde had his phone out now, record button red. He didn't want to fight. He wanted a story he could direct. The Letterman boy cracked his knuckles with the authenticity of someone who's watched a lot of knuckles get cracked on TV. The tall one folded his arms, then unfolded them, then found his pockets. The problem is, Letterman said, assuming the tone of a man working a jury, we think your wife might want to spend time with real men. Tall Oily cackled, a little too high, and checked to see if anyone was impressed. Yeah, before she forgets what that's like. The switch clicked. It's not anger clouds. It's something quiet and exact, like choosing which wrench fits a bolt. Civilian Ray stepped back. Staff Sergeant Emerson, hand-to-hand instructor, 2 tours in places where the sun burns differently. A man who's watched wind blow sand over the prints of a mistake, stepped forward. Sweetheart, I said without looking at her. It's okay. The blonde squinted. Okay. What? You want to do something about it? It means, I said, and placed my keys in Alice's palm. You followed us out here because you think you're tough. So let's find out. I slid off my jacket, folded it once, twice, laid it across Alice's arms the way I used to lay a rifle blanket. Rolled my sleeves. The night air touched my forearms and did nothing to the temperature. I breathed in through my nose, out through my mouth. The lot got wider. The angles sharpened. The distance from the blonde's feet to the curb turned into a number that lived in my knees. One rule, I said. One at a time. They laughed because young men always laugh before consequence introduces itself. The blonde put his phone away like he had decided memory would be enough. You serious, old man? You want to fight all 3 of us? One at a time, I repeated. Unless you're scared. A step too far. Pride is a lever with lots of purchase. Alice drifted back toward the truck, giving me space, eyes never leaving my shoulders. She knows the language there. During my last 5 years in the Corps, I taught defensive tactics to boots who thought push-ups made them bulletproof. You learn to read balance like handwriting. The way a shoulder rounds before a swing, the tell of a knee before a rush, the load-bearing lie of a stance. These kids brought swagger to a physics exam. Blondie came first, as scripted. This is for calling us kids, Grandpa, he yelled, rearing back with a right hand so telegraphed a certified letter would have arrived first. His shoulder dropped, his weight shifted to his rear leg, his mouth opened. The moment stretched into slow motion Sunday. In combat, the world gets generous with time. 2 inches left. That's all I did. His fist cut air where my head was supposed to be. The part of his swing designed to stop upon contact found only permission, and Newton, who never sleeps, invited him forward. He stumbled, tried to plant, found the brick wall of Murphy's. The sound, meat and masonry negotiating terms, landed across the lot. He met the wall with his face. People always think faces are tougher than they are. He slumped against brick, blinking blood onto his UNC logo. My face, he said through the muffling softness of swelling. You broke my face. You broke your own face, I said, brushing my sleeve. I moved. Letterman peeled his jacket like he'd been waiting for that cue. You got lucky with Brad, he said, squaring his stance. I played football. Good for you, I said. He lowered his shoulder and charged the way kids are taught to believe gravity is a teammate. I waited until the world agreed he wasn't stopping. Grab, pivot, redirect. The 3 steps of making someone else's momentum your hobby. He thundered into the dumpster at waist height. Physics collected its second tip of the night. His legs arced up and over, and suddenly he was upside down among the trash bags, Letterman's sleeves pinwheeling, feet bicycling the air. Help, came his voice from the can's metal mouth. I'm stuck. Leverage, I said. 20 years teaches you where it lives. The tall one, Jake, I'd learned, stared at me as if I'd pulled a tablecloth from under a full dinner service. He looked from Brad, who was leaving DNA on the wall, to Tyler, whose shoes kicked helplessly at the stars, then down to his hands to see if they were still there. One was holding his phone. The other wanted to be brave. This is crazy, he said, volume edging toward shrill. You can't just assault people. Assault? I raised an eyebrow. I haven't touched either of them. You boys brought your bodies to gravity and volunteered. He lifted the phone high. I'm calling the cops. That's the smartest thing anyone said tonight, I told him. Tell them 3 men followed a married couple outside and made threats. His mouth twisted around the taste of that, and then pride launched one last mission. He pretended to dial and came with a wide hook at my temple. Peripheral vision is a survival skill. In the Corps, you learn to see the parts of the world that think they're invisible. I dipped my head. His knuckles met the cast iron parking meter behind me. The crack reflected off the building and returned with interest. His scream wasn't anger. It was the pain map kind, the sound you only make when your body updates the program. My hand. He cradled it to his chest and folded into himself like a lawn chair. You broke my hand. Son, I said, tonight is a masterclass in self-service. You broke your own hand. I just introduced you to options. Murphy's door banged open and the night filled with observers, phones already raised. Pete stood at the threshold, dish towel over one shoulder, eyes measuring the whole scene. A bleeding, sniffling Brad, a flailing pair of pants and sneakers sticking out of a dumpster, and Jake whimpering on the asphalt. The lot smelled like spilled beer, diesel from the refrigerator unit, and the metallic blue of bad decisions. 3 of you against 2 of them, Pete said flatly into the general air as of a judge reading a verdict. You followed them out here. That's on all your videos now, boys. Alice stepped to my side and held my jacket out. I slid into it. That simple act, her hands smoothing the shoulders, her fingers finding the seam and tugging it straight, put something back into place inside me. The night turned down half a notch. You okay? I asked. Perfect, she said. Her eyes were steady in that way that told me she'd be perfectly fine stitching up a stranger's wound, and that, later, after the quiet returned, she'd ask me if my shoulders hurt and remind me we're not 25. Sirens rose from somewhere beyond the oaks, that Doppler swell you feel behind your teeth. The kids were trying to rewrite the script, even as they bled in it. He assaulted us. Jake blurted, voice jagged. This old man attacked 3 college students. Pete's voice came through a tunnel of decades, wiping down bars and breaking up arguments. Son, I watched the whole thing. He didn't throw a single punch. You boys ran into the world. A woman with a sleeve tattoo and a fierce bun held up her phone. Got it all, officer, she called, before the cruiser even rolled to a stop. The whole dance. He steps, they smash. Over and over. It's educational. 2 squad cars slewed to a halt, followed by an ambulance. The blue-red flash painted Murphy's brick and the cars and the faces of people trying to look like they didn't love watching. Officer Patricia Williams got out of the first car, pat to me, through veteran outreach. Her partner, Davidson, was new to me. They split the scene with trained eyes. Pat angled toward us. Davidson peeled off to the 3 boys. Evening, Pat said. You picking up part-time work teaching physics out here? Gravity runs a tight class, I said. I'm a guest lecturer. She smiled without showing teeth and got to business. Tell me what happened. I told it straight. We were leaving. Remarks were made. We continued leaving. They followed us. I offered a one-at-a-time compromise, because my mama raised me to be fair. They accepted and then introduced themselves to mass and acceleration. Any contact? Pat asked, pen poised. Only my shoes on the ground, I said, and my wife's hand in mine. Alice nodded. They were harassing us inside, too, she added, voice even professional. I wanted to ignore it. He said we should go. They followed. Davidson returned from the boy cluster, eyebrows up like someone who'd just been handed 3 different versions of the truth compatible with 0 videos. They're saying he attacked them, Sarge, he told Pat. Videos? Pat asked the crowd. Phones rotated toward her like sunflowers. She took statements, watched clips. Twice, she rewound the moment the blonde found the wall. Once she paused, leaned closer, and muttered, Lord, son, bend your knees when you run at Brick. The EMTs lifted Jake's hand, the knuckles beginning to balloon purple, into a temporary splint. Brad, head lolling, declined transport and then agreed to it when he tasted salt and metal for the 3rd time. Tyler had quieted down in the dumpster and was now letting 2 firefighters negotiate his exit with the seriousness of men who do not want to smell this smell any longer than necessary. When they finally levered him out, he stood dripping, Letterman jacket ruined, dignity nowhere to be found. You 3 are free to go, Pat told us after the paperwork was the right shape. We'll file a report for the university. The university? Alice asked. UNC Charlotte liaison, Pat said. Every Friday we fax them a sheet titled Bad Ideas Your Students Tried. Kidding. Mostly. We have a campus contact. We'll make sure these 3 have to explain themselves to someone who writes with letterhead. We gave her our numbers and shook hands. She squeezed my shoulder. Good form, old Marine, she said under her breath. Ma'am, I said. As we walked back to the truck, Jake's voice floated from the ambulance into the night. Mom, you don't understand. He didn't even hit us. He did some old guy ninja thing. The doors closed, and the siren lifted his words into the dark. We drove home with the windows cracked to let the night talk. Alice leaned her head back against the seat, the tendons in her neck easing one thread at a time. The Boone Pickens billboard on South cracked a smile at us in passing. We hit 2 green lights in a row. I felt my shoulders ask permission to lower. You didn't touch them, she said finally. Not once. No reason to, I said. They did all the touching they needed. You think they'll learn anything? People learn when the lesson costs enough. At home, she kicked off her heels by the door, perfect symmetry, toe to heel, something she's done since 1999 without needing to think about it. I hung our jackets. We brushed our teeth in the same mirror we've used to practice apologies and good news and weekend plans. In bed, she settled on my shoulder the way she did when we were younger and trying to believe forever was possible. The ceiling fan turned and turned. You okay? She asked again. I'm okay, I said. Are you? I will be, she said. You know what made me angriest? What? That they thought I had any interest in them. Like I'm a prize, and they get to announce a winner. I kissed her hair. You're not a prize, I said. You're the whole game. She laughed into my chest. The fan turned. The night settled. 2 mornings later, over coffee, my phone buzzed 6 times and then refused to stop. Pete had my number. He never calls before noon unless the world has news. You seen the internet, Ree? He asked without hello. I try not to, I said. Well, the internet's seen you. He laughed the bar owner laugh of a man who stocks the good whiskey behind the bad. Search Murphy's physics lesson. I did. The compilation had 2 million views before my thumb could decide whether to be flattered. Someone with edit software and free time had stitched 3 angles together, synced them to dramatic timpani, slowed the exact instant Brad met masonry, looped Tyler's dumpster entry like a gymnast vault, and froze the frame where Jake realized cast iron is a poor conversationalist. Captions bloomed like weeds. Age is just experience with interest. Never bring protein shakes to a physics fight. Grandpa's cardio is called patience. People are brutal, Alice said over my shoulder, half shocked, half entertained. People are accurate, I said, and then scrolled. Comments bunched up like spectators pressed against a fence. A woman wrote, as a nurse, I respect the clean technique. A man, he's not mad, he's just disappointed. A physics teacher, showing this in class Monday. Someone else, old guy didn't even blink. Under that, gravity blinked. Under that, I'm framing you broke your own face. Within a day, the local news had called twice and left voicemails with the long vowels of ambition. A morning show producer messaged Alice, not me, because somebody always wants the wife's angle. I ignored them. If there's one thing the Marines taught me beyond how to fold a map, it's that you don't stand in front of a moving machine to see if it slows down. Consequence, however, travels without invitations. Alice heard from a friend at the hospital that a UNC Charlotte dean had circulated a memo about community conduct, and that a fraternity had issued 3 suspensions pending review of an off-campus harassment incident. By lunch, someone had posted the boys' first names in a thread I did not click. By dinner, a cousin texted me a screenshot of a comment that said, I had class with Jake. He used to brag about picking fights. Not anymore. 3 days later, an email found its way to my inbox. The subject line said, from a parent. The body said, Mr. Emerson, my son Tyler was one of the boys who accosted you. I won't waste your time with excuses. He knows better. We raised him better. If you're willing, I'd like to bring him by to apologize. If not, I understand. It was signed with a name I could imagine answering roll call with authority. I read it twice, and then a third time for the shape of it. Shame lived in those sentences, but so did a hand extended toward responsibility. I forwarded it to Alice with a question mark. She replied, up to you. We picked a Saturday morning. The sky was the color of a clean sheet. The father arrived in a tan truck with a dent in the door that said he'd chosen to fix other things first. Tyler climbed down slowly, hands open, head low. Out of his Letterman jacket and reflected in morning light, he looked younger and older at the same time. I'm sorry, he said before his shoes found our walkway. For the words. For following you. For thinking we could decide what your wife wanted. For everything. His father stood beside him like a fence post, not touching, but present enough to lean on. I appreciate it, I said. That night could have gone worse. For you. For me. For everybody. It didn't. That's luck and a little bit of training. You ever think about what happens after a bad decision keeps going? He nodded. I'm thinking about it every hour, he said. I gestured to the porch chairs. We sat. I asked about school. He stared at the boards and said the scholarship was gone. The video had a way of re-enrolling you in a class you didn't want. He worked mornings now at his uncle's warehouse and afternoons at a grocery store. He took public transport and read a lot of comments he should have ignored. His father didn't interrupt except once, to say, "Consequences ain't cruelty, son. They're guardrails." I told him a few small things. When you're humiliated, try to do one thing well each day. When you want to disappear, find work with your hands. When you feel like you've broken something unfixable, improve a small corner of your world and let the timeline handle itself. He looked up like I'd turned a porch light on even though the sun was out. I don't deserve you being decent, he said. I shrugged. Maybe you don't, I said, but I'm not doing it for you. I'm doing it for the person you're going to be 2 years from now if you keep choosing better. When they left, his father shook my hand too long. Thank you, he said, for not turning it into a victory lap. I waved him off. I prefer victory naps. The second letter came from Brad. It was a single paragraph in his mother's handwriting asking me to please not press charges, and then a paragraph in his, crooked, tentative, saying he was under a lot of stress. I didn't reply. You can answer every letter life sends. You just have to pick whether you use words or time. The third reached me through a friend of a friend, and then through Pete, and finally through the postal service in an envelope that smelled like a locker room. Jake. I broke my hand. It began, as if that were new information. He wanted to meet. I didn't invite him. The truth is, I'd have had to stop myself from saying things not even the truth deserves to be carrying. He'll have enough company in his regret without me adding mine. Weeks slid by. The video kept orbiting. It would downgrade to meme, then to lore, then to something your friend brings up over wings when you mention Murphy's. Alice's promotion brought a new layer of long days and the kind of stories she can't tell at dinner except in the language of exhaustion. I ran more. Washington Park at sunrise makes a man's lungs feel like they weren't wasted on arguing. I started doing push-ups in the living room again. Not because I needed to fight anyone. Because I wanted to fight certain kinds of decay. One afternoon, Pete called with a voice like he'd found a 20 in an old jacket. You two coming in Friday, he asked. Got your booth dusted off. We went. Murphy's hadn't changed. The neon cougar stayed broken. The jukebox still thought Tom Petty was the only answer you needed. The bartender in training wasn't old enough to remember when Bud was king, but poured like he'd practiced with water. As we took the booth, heads turned. Not to gawk, to acknowledge. A man with a plumber's forearms raised his beer in my direction. I raised mine back. A woman with a preschooler on her hip smiled at Alice the way you smile at someone who pulled you from a rip current even if they didn't know your name. Pete brought 2 drinks we didn't order and set them down with a flourish. For the house heroes, he said, then put a hand up when I tried to argue. Don't. You kept it calm. You honored the floor. He pointed to the wall above our booth. A small brass plaque had appeared, where respect was earned and lessons were learned. The font was old-timey in a way that made it sound like a policy more than a commemoration. You're ridiculous, Alice told him, laughing, and kissed his cheek. Pete blushed like a man whose heart is wider than his chest. We ate burgers the way you eat burgers when you're allowed to blissfully forget cholesterol. Alice told me about a nurse on her ward who went back to school for her NP and about a resident who never learned how to listen to pain without reaching for jargon. I told her about Washington Park geese, how they're always polite until they aren't, and about the old Mustang a neighbor was rebuilding one bolt at a time. Ordinary talk. The best kind. Halfway through dinner, a man walked in with a boy. I knew the man's stance, the forward tilt of hard years, and the boy's shoes, the clean laces of someone who's trying. It wasn't Tyler, we'd already talked. It wasn't Brad. His face would have told me before his name did. It was someone else, someone who had watched a video enough times to wonder what came after. Are you? The man began when he reached our table. His voice was careful, respectful, and unsure, like he didn't want to knock something off a mantle. I am, I said. My nephew, he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. Hasn't been himself since he started believing avoidance was a plan. I thought maybe, if you had a minute. Sit, I said, and Alice added, want a Sprite, in the same breath. The boy nodded, eyes glossy like morning dew. We talked for 10 minutes. Not about fighting. About leaving. About choosing exits before you need them. About picking friends who pull you into better light. About how the first yes you say to a bad idea teaches your mouth it can form more of them. Thank you, the uncle said, and his voice shook the tiniest bit like a table leg that needs a folded napkin. After they left, Alice set her hand on mine. You're good at this, she said. At what? Taking heat out of things. I've put enough into the world, I said. Feels fair to balance the ledger. 6 months to the day after the parking lot lesson, Murphy's did what Murphy's has always done. Opened its doors and let the city be a version of itself. Pete insisted our tab was a myth. He brought a slice of pie with 2 forks and a story about a regular who'd once proposed to a woman in that booth and who now brought 3 little kids by every Christmas to look at the plaque like it was a star you make wishes on. Driving home, Alice reached for the radio and found a song we danced to at our wedding when my hair still thought it had a plan. I put my hand on her knee like I always do at stoplights. She put her hand on my hand. The city lights made small rivers on the windshield. You ever feel old? She asked, not as complaint, but as inventory. I feel seasoned, I said. Old is a number. Seasoned is a recipe. She snorted. That was terrible, she said. But I'm keeping it. The next week, the UNC liaison called to ask if I'd speak to an ROTC class about de-escalation. They responded to the video, she said, and not because of the spectacle. Because you didn't hit anyone. I said yes on a Wednesday because Wednesdays like to surprise you by being worth something. I stood in a fluorescent classroom and told 20 kids who believe in impossible things that the trick to staying whole is to let your pride take the first punch. I told them about exits and angles and knees that bend when fear says lock. I told them that the hardest skill to learn in any fight is saying no to your own anger until the moment when yes makes sense. And then I told them what I tell myself on mornings when my mirror has opinions. The strongest man in the room is the one who doesn't need anyone in the room to know it. Sir, a cadet asked, what if someone really deserves it? Then you'll still have the evidence, I said, tapping my chest. And you'll still have to live with it. Figure out which cost you can carry. On the way out, a boy in a clean uniform stopped me in the hall. He didn't say his name. He said, I sent a bill to my father once. For the cost of a mistake I made. He didn't pay it with money. I nodded because some debts don't know how to read invoices. Summer rolled forward, then fall again, which felt like a wink. Life didn't become meaningful because we went viral. It already was. Alice negotiated budgets and egos and injuries with a grace people mistake for luck. I learned to bake a peach cobbler my mother wouldn't haunt me over. We fought twice about nothing important and once about something silly and made up before the coffee got cold. I called a buddy from my second deployment, and we didn't talk about the desert until the 3rd beer. Pete put a new bulb in the Cougar sign, and it read cores without stuttering for the first time in a decade. The world turned the way it always does when you stop asking it to perform and let it be a companion. Every now and then, someone would stop me at the hardware store or the farmer's market or just on a sidewalk and say, "Are you?" And I'd say, "I'm whoever you think I am." And we'd both laugh because it let us both be right. Once, a woman placed her palm flat against my forearm and said, I showed my little brother that video. He's walking away from some boys he used to think he had to impress. I told her that counted as a win. She said, for both of us. And then one night, months after we planted that plaque with our footsteps, the universe tried its old trick again. Different bar, different boys, same audition. We were leaving a restaurant downtown when 3 suits, loud with energy and expensive with ignorance, sized us up and stepped into the frame. The tallest, hair slicked back by product and courage, looked at Alice like she was a staff position he wanted to fill. Hey, sweetheart, he said, like he'd found the words under a bar stool. You sure you're with the right guy? I breathed in, felt the weight of my keys, tasted the place where my tongue rests when patience is easy. I looked at Alice. She looked at me. We turned, stepped off the curb, and walked away. No lesson this time. Not because they didn't deserve one. Because we didn't. Was that restraint? Alice asked, amused. That was retirement, I said. She laughed. From fighting. From giving away free education to students who won't enroll. We cut across the plaza. The fountain talked to itself. A kid on a scooter did not die, and his mother lifted her eyes to the sky in thanks. We passed under a canopy of trees that learned our names and forgot them again the way trees do. At home, we locked the door and turned off the hall light and decided to let the world spin by itself for a while. In the morning, I jogged past the lake at Washington Park and watched a heron decide, after a long pause, to take flight. It didn't look like effort. It looked like remembering. Sometimes people ask me what lesson I wanted those boys at Murphy's to take away. I could talk about respect, about the body's delicate treaties with physics, about drinking without borrowing brains from a bottle. But here's the truth I carry in my pocket with my coins. Power isn't in the punch you throw, it's in the one you decide not to. Dignity isn't declaring your strength, it's standing in it quietly. And love, the kind that keeps you showing up in a world that won't stop auditioning your temper, sounds a lot like your wife's hand finding yours under a table and squeezing once to say, I know you, and I know we're going to be fine. Murphy still plays Tom Petty. Pete still pretends the plaque was the bar's idea. The Cougar sign flickers again because that's what old neon does. The booth where we sat the first night we were brave enough to imagine a future is still there. Every time we slide in, we order what we always do. I watch the door in case the universe thinks it's time for a pop quiz. Most nights, it doesn't. Most nights, the quiz is this. Can you enjoy what you have without needing to prove you deserve it? I'm working on an A. And if you're wondering how a hottie can be with an old man, I've got an answer that doesn't need a parking lot or a dumpster to make its point. She's with me because we learned to keep each other, on purpose, every day. Because I fold her jacket on the back of her chair when she's cold before she says anything. Because she wakes me gently from bad dreams, and I brew the coffee that cancels them. Because we've built a life out of small mercies and ordinary courage. Because I still look at her the way those boys did, with awe, but with a reverence they never learned, and with a love that doesn't need an audience or a camera or a fight to prove itself. The strongest victories are the quiet ones. The best lessons don't leave bruises. And sometimes, if you listen closely, you can hear respect humming under the jukebox, right where we left it.